In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. For years, the Muslim world has been witnessing the most controversial events. Israel, occupier of Palestine, has imposed its most criminal attacks on the Muslims of the region. Recent annexation of Golan Heights by the government of Israel has raised many concerns by the international observers. The proposed sanctions by the United Nations against Israel due to this inhuman act was called a shame by President Reagan. The superpowers, especially US, had always been suppressing the Muslim masses by supporting the tyrannical regimes of the region, such as King Khalid in Saudi, King Hussein in Jordan, or so-called President Mubarak in Egypt. These corrupt families control the Muslim land and resources under supervision of their masters. During the past, any kind of liberation movement by Muslim masses have been brutally attacked by the superpowers or their puppets. The Islamic Revolution in Iran created new hopes among Muslims and other oppressed nations. Since that, the Islamic movements and other kind of liberation movements have substantially increased around the globe. The Iran-Iraq stalemate has moved in the direction of victory for Iran. In a matter of days or weeks, the Islamic forces of Iran will enhance their final victory over Iraqi regime. This will open a new phase in the struggle of oppressed people. It will not only teach the masses to depend on mobilization of their own resources, but it also will be a lesson for the dictators that they no longer will be able to survive under the banner of the superpowers. And hopefully Muslim masses will realize the importance of unification under the banner of Islam. Now I'd like our brother to introduce our speaker.
In the name of God, as the brothers and sisters have been informed before, our program tonight consists of 3 parts. We have a lecture for about an hour, and then we have questions and answers for about half an hour, and then we have a short movie. Our guest speaker tonight is Mr. Kokab Siddiq from Pakistan. Mr. Siddiq has PhD, MA, and BA with honors in English literature and language. He has 14 years experience in journalism and publishing. He also has about 5 years in the teaching of English composition, remedial English as second language, and literature for undergraduates. Dr. Siddiq has numerous articles, reports, short stories, and editorials, and translations. He has been awarded by the Association of Universities and Colleges in Canada, and he also had the Commonwealth Scholarship from 1970 to 1975. Dr. Kokab Siddiq, please.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulihil Kareem wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajmain. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. We have a lot of space here, and it wouldn't be a bad idea if more people move in front and be a little more together. In that nice introduction, our brother missed some things which really needed to be said and said other things which were merely academic. The thing which I find of more interest, which perhaps should be mentioned right away in the beginning, that recently I had the privilege of visiting Iran, and I found it an extremely interesting and educational experience. And as we go on, I hope to come back to that and discuss it, and I hope I will be able to provoke some questions which we can discuss together. When we look at the world in which we live today, the question arises, why should we really be talking about the Muslim world and the crisis in the contemporary Muslim world and the situation which Muslims are facing? Well, there are many reasons for it. One is, of course, that this world has become such a small place to live in that we cannot pretend that we can run away from what is happening to large numbers of the world's people. There is no escape. You cannot go away to some private part of the world and forget about what's happening in the Middle East or in Asia or in Africa or in Latin America or anywhere else. So there is the example of the man who really wanted to get away from everything, and he chose one small island in the Pacific. And he went away there and he thought that he'll never be bothered again. Now, by chance, the name of that island was Guadalcanal, where some of the greatest, largest land, sea, and air battles of the Second World War were fought. So he couldn't really run away. And also, in connection with our, of course, the larger issue of humanity is there. How can we ignore what's happening in that little world in which we live? But in addition to that, it also seems quite apparently that the future of the world in many ways will be decided by what will happen to the Muslim people of the world living all the way from Morocco to the Philippines. There are many factors in the political, economic, and social world in which we live which are known, but there is the unknown factor which might decide the future, and that unknown factor is the 1 billion Muslims who live in this world of ours and who still have to make known to the world what their choice is and where will they put their weight down. If we look at the Muslim world, one thing is almost, should we say, unquestionable and which really cannot be debated, which is very apparent, that there is a contradiction between the aspirations and the ideology and beliefs of the Muslims, a very sharp contradiction. On the one hand are their beliefs, their ideology, their aspirations, the things which they would like to achieve, and on the other, the reality of the world in which they live. For instance, Muslims are taught by the Quran, if I wanted to put it in one little verse of the Quran to sum it up, that would be Inal hukmu illa lillah, which means that authority belongs to Allah alone. It is a denial of human authority. It is a rejection of human will. In other words, it is an acceptance of teachings coming from beyond the limited human sphere of knowledge. So it is in fact a liberating concept which is calling us to acceptance of a guidance which is not from within our narrow selves, but which has come from outside, from a larger authority, which is the Creator. On the one hand, there is this, and the other, the Muslim world is ruled in actuality by small elites. That in almost every country in the Muslim world, you find small groups of people deciding what everybody else should do. Out of those 1 billion Muslims of the world, there are a very, very few who are in a position to decide what their future or their children's future is going to be. Largely, that future is being decided for them by those little elites, which exist in almost every country in the Muslim world. And now these elites, they have certain characteristics, which, if we can understand those characteristics, explain a lot about what is happening in the Muslim world. These elites, they have notions of their own of what their nations should do. They have strong beliefs that they know more. They know more than their nation knows. So this is an element of a belief in their own superiority, which comes naturally to elites. Perhaps that is the reason why they are elites, or they have made themselves into elites, or they have emerged as elites. They believe that they, although they are very few and they live apart from the great majority of the people, they believe that they have more understanding and knowledge and they should decide what everybody else should do. So as a result, if you take this into the political sphere and then try to apply it, what happens is that these elites all believe in dictatorship. These elites believe that they should impose their will on the people, and the people should just follow them and obey them. And on the other hand, there is this phenomenon that most of these elites, perhaps if I would very much doubt if there are any exceptions, that these elites are controlled and largely influenced by the superpowers of the world. That is, these little groups of people who are in power depend not so much on their own influence with their own people as they do upon powers outside their countries. As a result, often they are very antagonistic and hostile to their own people, but they are very friendly with either one of the superpowers. So this is one aspect of sharp contradiction which exists in the Muslim world. On the one hand, this belief that authority belongs to Allah alone. Human beings should not bow down before other human beings. Allah has made them free and He has given them guidance. And it is that guidance which they should be following. And on the other hand, this reality that in actuality the great majority of the people are forced to follow little groups of people who sit in a certain corner or apart from the majority and decide for them what should be done. This emerges, for instance, in phenomena like the Ba'ath Party, which rules in Iraq or which rules in Syria. And if you look at the doctrines of the Ba'ath Party, they run like this, that they consider the people as dupes and simple-minded. They think that these people don't know, the majority of the people don't know anything, and we, the elites, are the ones who are going to lead them and direct them and tell them where to go. And as a result, if you look at that Ba'ath ideology, there is an element of contempt in it for the Muslim people. There is an element of this superior way of thinking that these so-called misled masses believe in religion, but religion and Islam especially was meant for a certain period of time in history, and that time has passed. And according to the Ba'athist theory, that Islam is a part of Arab history, although it is now more or less, something of the past. So they construct an ideology in which that Islam is a little part of history, and the rest, of course, is something else, national socialism, as they call it. And this elitism results in strange forms of contradictions. For instance, take Egypt, where again you find what Gerard Chaliand calls a bureaucratic collectivism. That is, a label of socialism is there on the government, but in actuality what happens is that there is a giant bureaucracy which runs the country. And because of its imposition of its will upon the people of Egypt, in the time of Nasser, in the time of Sadat, and even now, there are these extremely contradictory things which happen. For instance, that the statue of the pharaoh Ramesses, it's constructed in the middle of Cairo, the capital city of Egypt. That pharaoh, who is the symbol of oppression and dictatorship in the Quran. The Quran is full of condemnation of Pharaoh, Firaun, that symbol of tyranny. But we find that in Egypt, his statue has been constructed in the main city on the main highway, among the Muslim people, among those masses who believe that the Quran is right and Pharaoh was wrong. So this is like a slap in the face of the Muslims, you see. Sort of putting them down, telling them that we know better and you don't know. So they have their own notions. For example, they have this notion of modernization. The word modernization has been very popular, especially in the West, where we have been told that many so-called Muslim rulers have been carrying out programs of modernization. We were told, for instance, that the Shah of Iran was carrying out a modernization program. And such programs are continuing in Indonesia, in Pakistan, so many other countries. And what it amounts to is what they call in their own jargon the transfer of technology, that they take what is produced here in the West and they dump it there in the East. And one of the crudest examples of that, of course, is the dumping of contraceptives in Indonesia, in Pakistan, and so on. You see, the people have a lot of children. The people breed according to these elites. You see, they have this contempt. They breed, like maggots. Millions of people. How to stop them from breeding? What do? They dump contraceptives. And they sort of lecture down to them that you ignorant, illiterate people, why do you have so many children? You should stop having children so that you can progress and you can modernize and your societies can become modernized and you should have all the comforts of life which people in the West have. Of course, the power and the authority remains in that little group, that elite which owns or controls most of the wealth of the country, which is produced by those same people who have the lot of children, you see. With the help of those children, all that wealth is produced, which is utilized by this little group. And at the same time, there is the parallel phenomena that while they are crushing or trying to impose on their own people, they are in turn controlled by the superpowers who in various cases tell them that this is the ideology or the methodology you should apply in your country. Then the other element of contradiction, which is very, apparent for a Muslim, is that according to the Quran, the Muslims are supposed to carry out their activities through mutual consultation. According to the Quran, Amrahum Shura Bainahum. That is, the Muslims are those who conduct their activities by mutual consultation. Mutual consultation which involves free discussion, free acceptance, consent through discussion, and so on. So this is the Quranic concept of what any Islamic political, social, or economic system should be. So as opposed to this, we find that the Muslim world is racked by and is in the control of people who do not believe in shura at all, who do not believe in mutual consultation, and who, as I was trying to point out in the first example, would like to impose their own brand, their own ideology on the people, although that ideology has very little to do with the great majority of the people of that country. Then the third contradiction is that of nationalism. So the Quran tells us that innamal mu'minuna ikhwa, that the Muslims are one brotherhood. Wherever they might be living, whatever their cultural backgrounds or languages might be, but they are one. And their sorrows and their joys should be shared and they should help each other. And that is how they can become a world power and they can change their own destinies as well as that of the world. But we find the very sharp elements of nationalism exist in the Muslim world. And again, these elements of nationalism are encouraged by all those ruling elites. So much so that the Muslims have been cut off from each other, are unable to understand the problems of each other, are often unaware of what is happening to other Muslims in nearby countries. One of the most sorry examples of that was my own country, Pakistan. At the time of the Shah, if you remember the incidents of the 15th of Khordad, that is June the 5th, 1963, there was a tremendous upheaval in Iran at that time. And the army of the Shah was brought out into the cities and killed thousands and thousands of Muslims, who were later dumped into mass graves. And about that killing, there is an Orientalist who has written a book called The Political Elite of Iran, that is Marvin Zonis. He's not a friend of the Muslims, but even he points out in that book that when the killing was going on, the commander-in-chief of the army came to the Shah and said to him that if the soldiers have to continue to kill people at this level and at this rate, they might refuse to shoot after a certain period of time. So the Shah forced that commander out of the service, sent him to some other province, had another commander appointed, and more troops were brought in to crush the people, and thousands were killed. Now, the way this news was reported and known in Pakistan is very interesting. See, I was in Pakistan at that time, and we were told in the media of the government that there are some mullahs, some religious, narrow-minded, authoritarian people who want to stop the modernization which the Shah is bringing and who want to take away from the Muslim women the rights which the Shah is trying to give them. And as a result of this, when the mullahs saw some women who were not Islamically dressed, they went and killed a woman. And as a result of this killing, the mullahs were extremely angry, and they went and they killed a woman. So the women were very angry and they killed a mullah. So one mullah was killed and one woman was killed. This was how the 15th of Khordad was reported in Pakistan. And if you are aware of what really happened in that massacre, you can well imagine how things can be distorted and presented. So that across the border from Iran, the people are totally unaware of what has been happening in their neighboring country. And they are told, for instance, that the Shah was the best friend of Pakistan because he gave so many millions of dollars of aid to Pakistan. Actually, he was giving that aid to the governments in Pakistan, but the way it is presented is that he was giving that money to Pakistan. Therefore, you will often find many Pakistanis saying that the Shah was the friend of Pakistan, although he was the worst enemy of his own people. Now, these contradictions have intensified in recent years, and you find upheavals taking place in Muslim countries, and the non-Muslim critics of the Muslim world talking about the arc of crisis, that the Muslim world seems to be in a constant upheaval. And these, you're aware of the revolution in Iran, then there are the incidents which have taken place in Afghanistan, that the Muslims of Afghanistan are fighting against a superpower there. The people of Iraq are in revolt. Their best known and most knowledgeable religious scholars have been executed without trial. There are the people of Syria who are fighting against their own government. There are the people of Egypt who have been arrested in their tens of thousands, so much so that one reporter who got in from the West wrote back home that the prison for women in Egypt, in Cairo, outside Cairo, is packed to capacity with Muslim women. Hundreds of Muslim women have been arrested, and the number of arrests of Muslims all over Egypt has been in the thousands. Then in Arabia itself, there has been upheaval. There are Islamic movements in Arabia who are demanding to know why Arabia is being called Saudi Arabia when it does not belong. The earth belongs to Allah. It does not belong to any human beings. And you're aware how there was an upheaval there, and 65 people were executed without trial. And of course, none of that came up, or at least was not given much importance here in the West. Then in Pakistan, a lot is happening. And recently, you must have heard that thousands of people have been arrested there. Teachers have been on strike, and there are various incidents reported from there. All this shows that the people of the Muslim world are unhappy. There is a growing upheaval. That is, the Muslim people are demanding that they should have the right to decide what they should do with their lives. They should be the ones who should decide how they should shape their lives. Their lives should not be shaped for them by other forces, by external forces. They want to put an end to dependence. They want to stand on their own feet and decide what their future should be. And of course, this is a very unpleasant thing for those who would not like the 1 billion Muslims of the world to stand up and declare that they will decide their own futures. Now, in this entire situation, one very large event has taken place which has perhaps signaled that the future is very bright for the Muslim world, and that is the revolution in Iran. Now, this revolution is of great interest for people, especially Muslims, outside Iran, for a number of reasons. One fundamental reason is that for the first time, it has given importance and has brought forth the role of the people as the deciding factor and the power in that sphere of life. That it is the people who are going to decide what is going to happen to their country and what its policies should be and how it should spend its wealth. This has not happened in the Muslim world for the last, let's say, 1,000 years. And these people, for the first time, have risen with the name of Allah, with the name of the Quran. In other words, they have not sought any ideology from outside. They have looked to their own roots, to their own sources of inspiration. They have come forth with this idea that we will not be able to save ourselves unless we look into that which has always been most precious for us. That is the Quran and the way of the Prophet ﷺ. That it is from there that we will be able to save ourselves. We will not be able to seek a way out for ourselves if we keep looking to alien ideologies. And with this idea of people's power, which was, of course, summed up by Ali Shariati in his discussions of An-Nas. He said that the Quran begins with Bismillah and ends with An-Nas, humanity, mankind, people. It is to these people, the average people, all the people of the world, to whom the message of Islam is directed. So we find that this people's power coming into its own and at the same time seeking its own roots and looking for guidance to its own ideology, combined with a leadership which is totally uncompromising and tested. And in this entire process, a certain decentralization of power taking place. See, this is one of the things which I could not understand, and many other people do not understand about Iran, that you constantly hear this complaint. People saying, who is an authority in Iran? Whom should you talk to? Nobody seems to be an authority. So they say this all the time, and especially they say it as a jibe and as a form of mockery. In the beginning, even the ruler of Iraq, when he invaded Iran, he used to say, well, we really don't know whom to talk to over there. Even if we want to make peace, we won't know whom to talk to. And at the same time, a very contradictory statement that there is a terrible dictatorship in Iran. So which one should you accept? Is there a terrible dictatorship which would control everything, or is there decentralization so much so that you don't know who is an authority? So this is a sort of confusion which cannot be cleared up unless somebody visits there and tries to find out how that country really works. And one of the things which has now become understandable for me is that there are various, you could say, focal points of power. Because the people are in power, therefore the localities, you see, every locality has become a center of power. And these centers of power together combine to express the will of the people. For instance, I saw over there that they have these Pasdaran-e-Inqilab, the revolutionary, Islamic Revolutionary Guards, young people who are drawn from those masses, those who used to be people of no significance, the average people of Iran, the ordinary people who were sort of brushed aside by the governmental authorities. The millions of ordinary people, now you find that from among them are coming these Pasdaran-e-Inqilab, those people who believe that they will fight for this revolution, whatever happens, regardless of all consequences. And they are all people who are sort of in the front line of the revolution, that they are the ones who bear the brunt of all the attacks on the revolution, and who are the ones who give the martyrs, who are sacrificed in that way. And then combined with that, of course, there are many other institutions. There are the committees. I was surprised to find that in Tehran and in other cities also, Every locality has its own committee. These are the average people, the ordinary people who have made these committees who run their little locality. And these are again armed. And I was surprised that at the audacity of those propagandists who claim that there is dictatorship there, when I found that there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are armed. That is, the masses are armed. For instance, Imam Khomeini sometime back had called for a, how many million army? 12. And I was investigating that, how far that has been implemented, and I found out that about 2 million are now under arms. On the 11th of February, there was a parade in Azadi Square, where apart from the people who came to watch the parade, there were literally tens of thousands of young people who were passing through, you see, marching, parading, all armed. So there are these Pasdaran-e-Inqilab, that is the Revolutionary Guards. There are these committees, which are in every locality. Then in addition, you have this Jihad-e-Sazindagi, you have these educated people, who used to be at one time, this is very common in other countries also, that revolutionaries sit in coffee shops and talk about revolution. They talk academically, very nice talk, about dialectics and about how the masses should behave and what did Marx say and how angels helped him and so on, and what is their day-to-day problems, what are their sufferings, and how that change can be brought about in that society which would transform the lives of the people. So there is this Jihad-e-Sazindagi, these people who volunteer to go out into the most rugged and remote areas of Iran, where these educated people probably had never been before, and try to deal with the average person over there, which of course creates many problems. And a person from a university in Tehran who has never gone to Kurdistan before, he goes there and tries to relate to the people over there who are very rough people, who have been always mistreated by the Shah and the regimes before that. So there is a lot of adjustment which has to be carried out. So there is this Jihad-e-Sazindagi, which is extremely active. Again, this is a sort of level of leadership, responsibility, etc. Then, in addition to this, after the call for mobilization came, there are what are known as the Basij, the mobilization forces, which exist in the villages, in the tribal areas, on the borderlands, again in the cities and so on. Whoever cannot go into the other forces, he goes into the Basij, into the mobilization forces. And then the old army and so on are being changed and put into the service of the people. And in addition to all this, the major force which I found, which I think is perhaps the key to understanding what has been going on over there, are the women of Iran. The way women have been presented, the women of Iran have been presented in America, it would seem that perhaps they have retrogressed and they have gone back to the medieval ages and they are totally, suppressed and forced to wear chadors and things like that. But after going there, I found that the women perhaps are more revolutionary there than anybody else. It is these women who have given their most beloved people, their father or brother or son or even a child, for that revolution. And when you go to the Bahisht-e-Zahra cemetery, where these martyrs are buried, you realize why the revolution can sustain so many blows and still survive, although it does not have that conventional power and it is not supported by any of the two superpowers. You see, this is an amazing thing, that the contempt they have for the superpowers, the leadership there, especially Imam Khomeini, have deliberately tried to cultivate in the people a contempt for the superpowers. It is not that they hate Americans. They don't have any hate for Americans as such. See, for instance, they would shout "Marg bar America" over there, and then they found out that I have come from America, and then they would say, "We are not against the American people." Immediately, the very politically conscious people, even the average person in the street, they would be, of course, slightly shocked for a minute. He's come from America, that America which sends all the bombs and rockets to be rained down over there. But then they say that, no, we have nothing against the American people. So there is this contempt for authority other than that of Allah. So I was surprised at the amount of spirit in the people. These women who go to mourn for their beloved people to Bahisht-e-Zahra, you can see the sorrow in their faces. They have suffered tremendously. But you will, in the interviews which I carried out with many of them, they would seldom express anything, any personal sorrow, you see. They seem to have made their will part of the larger will. That they are more interested that Iran should survive as a free Islamic state. That is more important. That the enemies of Islam should not be able to overwhelm and defeat and destroy that country which has become Islamic. That seems to be the most important thing. For instance, we visited, I and some other journalists with me, there were some people from Canada in that group. We went to some hospitals where the people who had been injured in various actions, they were there. And there were some extremely inspiring things which we heard from them, in spite of their pain and their suffering. But one which I found rather interesting was that there was one Hizbullahi, as you call them, those who follow the party of Allah, those who are actually, very strong supporters of the Imam's line. And he had been, one of the members of the MKO had come into his shop and shot him. And that bullet was still in his jaw. And that operation had to be carried out probably that same evening. And his wife had come to care for him, and he was there waiting for that operation with a bandage and everything. And I interviewed him, some other people also interviewed him. And he was, a very spirited person. He was really not worried. He thought that whatever had happened to him was, in a way, ennobling for him. It made him more noble. But that was not so much the thing which impressed me. What impressed me was the attitude of his wife. You see, she was there standing outside, waiting for the guests to leave, and perhaps she must have been thinking about the operation which was forthcoming. And it was quite evident that she was more interested in that cause of Islam for which he had become Hizbullahi, rather than whether he will, how much suffering he might have. The usual thing which a housewife thinks of, that the shop will close down and where will the money come from, or the man will die and she will be widowed and so on. Although that suffering was reflected in her face. But it's difficult to convey here in America that spirit which she had, that she was totally oblivious of the personal element of loss. She was more interested in the sense of that feeling that perhaps Islam will be more victorious because of this. And there were many, many instances of this. People who were, when we interview them, you find out that actually they have done great things and have endured a lot and have suffered a lot, but they seldom talk about their personal sense of loss. They talk more about the cause. They don't show off at all, and they talk softly, gently, like people who have endured a lot. Nothing is really new for them. So actually I got carried away from the women's role, you see that Islam, as it has come into the home and into the hearts of these women, it is that which has made this revolution invincible. Invincible in the sense that when you go there, you realize that it would perhaps be, if supposing, I felt this after going there and going through the whole various parts of the country, that in case America lands its troops there one day, that will be a terrible day, not so much for Iran, but for America. Because people, I think, here and in other parts of the world, they don't realize the spirit which has grown there. And unless a person actually goes and visits, it's difficult to convey that. It is a tremendous spirit that they have faith. This is something which cannot be really explained in totally rational terminology. That is why most sociologists, I would say almost all sociologists and historians, have failed to predict the coming of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. For example, Professor Bill, James Bill, you might have heard of him, is sympathetic to Iran. He was writing a book on the Middle East at the time when the revolution took place. That is, this book was in the press at that time. And I have that book. In fact, he sent it to me for review. His office sent it to me for review. And I found that in that book, there's a whole discussion of Muslim history, background, and so on, and what are the factors which work in a Muslim culture and how a Muslim culture develops. And then he comes to the modern times, contemporary Muslim countries. He has a lot in that about Iran and so on. But there is no inkling even anywhere in that there is such a thing possible as an Islamic revolution. His tools of sociology and history were not sufficient for him to deal with that phenomenon. And I think that's what's really happening to Western media also in America and in other countries. I remember last year, there is an analyst who writes for the New York Times. His name is Middleton, and he writes, some sort of a strategic review regularly in the New York Times. He's a veteran writer. And he writes about he has been writing about the Iraq-Iran war off and on. And last year he made a very firm, forecast. He said there is no chance that Iran can take the offensive in the Iraq-Iran war. And I have kept that clipping with me as a proof of the futility of using modern sociological and historical methods of analysis to understand an Islamic revolution. Because the basic thing over there is that they have tremendous faith. And this faith has been brought into their hearts that if they have learned this through experience and through the teachings of their leaders, that their only way to victory is through the acceptance of Allah's will, through the acceptance of that guidance which has come from outside the human sphere. Of course, in this discussion of religion, there is also the discussion of true religion versus false religion. You know that Marx had said that religion is the opium of the people, and there was an element of truth in that. There is a lot of religion which is the opium of the people, and which is sometimes deliberately used to put people to sleep. In many countries, you will find this false kind of religion. In Muslim countries, you will find that there are many, many religious scholars who discuss trivialities, who spend their time in discussing trivialities. For example, I receive books from my country which talk about, should you beat your chest in mourning or no? Should you have a beard or no? Or what should be the length of your, dress? Things like that. In a country where the basic issue is that there is a military dictatorship which has imposed itself upon the people and which uses Islam to mislead the people and to remain in power, where there is a very deeply entrenched class system. You find that the army is in power and it has various ways of entrenching itself. There is the bureaucracy, the police, and a very old system which was left by the British and before that by the Mughals, hundreds of years old, in which the great majority of the people, let's say 85 to 90%, do not even have their basic rights. See, for instance, can you hear me at the back? Raise your hands when you start getting bored. In any case, we have run out a lot of time. You see, again a contradiction that Islam, the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, peace be upon him, has taught that in a society where one person is well fed and goes to sleep in peace and with his stomach full, and there is another person who is his neighbor and he is starving, the mercy of God is removed from that entire locality. This is on the one hand the teaching of the Prophet of God, and on the other hand we find Pakistan, just as an instance, a country where they talk all the time about Islam, but the basic needs of the people are not met, while a very small section of the ruling class enjoys itself and wastes whatever the resources of the people are for its own pleasures.